welcome into the garage area for 2025, and unfortunately we are still in the garage. And the goal was to be in my new basement in 2025, but we didn't quite make it there due to just the issues of life popping up throughout the whole fall and winter so far. But I'm happy to be here with you, Ryan, and to be talking about NASCAR, to be talking about the Daytona 500, even though it didn't go the way that I was hoping that it would. William Byron ends up getting the win in the Daytona 500. We saw Jesse Love win the Xfinity Series race, and I saw Parker Kligerman win the truck race, but the win ends up getting credited to Corey Heim. We'll talk about that later. What do you think of the race in general as far as the Cup race goes?
For what I was expecting, I thought it was a pretty decent race. Even I think the cautions fell at the right time to help take out some of the fuel saving that we might talk about later. But I still think there's some things that need to be worked on with the package as far as the drag and stuff that these cars have, and I think that's what kind of causes some of these incidences at the end of these races and stuff. But overall, I thought it was a pretty decent race.
Yeah, I agree. I was excited because it's the first race of the year. It's the Daytona 500 and all the prestige and allure that comes with that particular race. But I knew I had to temper my expectations because we've seen, like you just said, locked three wide, everybody running 80%, 70%, 60% throttle at times trying to save fuel. And that definitely isn't the kind of racing that I'm looking to watch. And I guess just knowing that as a fan, it looks cool on TV, but knowing that that's what's going on, that they're not actually racing as hard as they could is disappointing. And I had my expectations tempered because of that. But like you just said, I was pretty impressed with what they ended up doing, the product that they ended up putting on the racetrack. For 3/4 of the race was pretty good. There were certainly some times where fuel saving was coming into play, but not everybody was saving all at the same time, and it was pretty cool. So let's kind of go through the events of the race a little bit. You had Chase Briscoe on the pole and Austin Cindric on the outside front row. They raced about 10 laps, 8 or 10 laps, whatever it was, before we ended up being under caution for rain, and that lasted 4 or 5 hours. Something like that they were under red flag conditions for rain, and as they were preparing to dry the racetrack, at one point they were going to put guys back. Did they put them back in the cars? And they were actually out on the racetrack.
They had 10 laps of caution before then they brought them back down pit road.
Because it started raining again.
Yeah.
Finally, it dried out enough that they were able to actually get going racing again. It started about 6:30. They'd actually bumped up the start time to 1:30. It was supposed to be 2:30. They bumped it up to 1:30 because of the weather and ran those first 10 laps and then didn't get restarted until about 6:30. So we had a prime time Sunday night Daytona 500, and it went off from the time that it got restarted without a hitch as far as weather went, even though there were still some concerns here and there. The first real incident that we saw was about 3 to go in stage one. Denny Hamlin and Zane Smith kind of get together. I don't know what the initial contact was that got Hamlin sideways.
Well, there was a check up ahead of him. I think Zane Smith was bump drafting him, so that got Hamlin squirrely, I guess you would say. And he saved it on the apron.
Yeah.
But Zane Smith lost it up into Josh Berry.
Yeah.
That was
took out both of those cars. Hamlin obviously was able to continue. The 38 and 21 though, they were toast after that particular point. Joey Logano had a really fast car and good opportunity to win the race. It was one of those guys that even when other people were saving fuel and he was running a lesser throttle percentage, it seemed like him and Cindric or him and Blaney or all the Penske cars together could just go anyways and continue to pass cars. They were really well set up, and like you have written down here, he dominated and won the first stage. And then to restart the second stage, he was in the outside lane, I assume to be up there meshed with Blaney to take off on the restart. And when they went, the 22 car just did not go. And he started to slow up, and I didn't even notice it at first. I was just like, wow, the inside line fired really well. And Clint Boyer was saying on the broadcast that Logano must have missed a shift or something, and didn't end up being the case. He was actually having issues with horsepower, or with the motor itself running the way that it was running was all messed up, and he wasn't able to go. He didn't have any power to be able to actually move that outside lane. Caused a big pile up. further back at the pack. I don't even remember who all was involved in that, but a bunch of cars spun out and were able to continue on. I know that Briscoe was involved in that. I think that trashed the 91.
91 to 1.
Yeah, Ross Chastain, Castroneves.
I know the 19 was involved in it, but he obviously
he continued on. I think there was other cars that I remember seeing that were spun that continued.
Kyle Busch was in that
Kyle
one too.
Busch, yeah. And he was really fast throughout the whole day. Basically, the issue with Logano's car was they talked about it on the broadcast that he changed the throttle body, but I saw on Twitter that they didn't actually swap it out. They tore it apart and found trash in it. It looked like a piece of a rag or something that you would use just to clean up parts. Was stuffed inside the throttle body. And I thought that, there was grill on his debris on his grill earlier in the race. And that I thought that maybe a piece of that had broke off. It got sucked into the air cleaner and into the throttle body eventually. And it didn't look like that was the case at all. Like, there were two separate incidents altogether, unrelated. But either way, had issues with that. They pulled it out of there and fixed it. And he was fast after that. Started climbing his way back up through the second stage. I think he finished 8th in the second stage. Yeah. And he was good to go. And I don't know why they thought after that they needed to change the air box also. But at the end of stage 2, I know they brought him back down pit road, changed the whole air box, and he restarted at the tail end at beginning of stage 2 as well. Ryan Blaney, another Penske car, really fast, won stage 2. And really in stage 3, it felt like it was a bunch of fuel saving for a long period of time. From the time that they started the second stage to the time, I would say 20 to go, 25, somewhere in there. It felt like they were actually picking up and starting to race a little bit. In fact, I was watching Logano because he was so far back there after changing that airbox. He was trying every lane. He was on the bottom, he was in the middle, he was up high, and he couldn't go anywhere. And finally, he worked his way up to about midway up through the pack, and was the only reason I'm focusing so hard on him was just because he was going to the front. And he was up there with, I know Bubba Wallace was trying to get that lane going, and it looked like he was a hard car to push. Clint Boyer kept talking about how loose he was every time he got hit. Corey LaJoie was in that mix, really strong throughout the whole 500. And this kind of leads into the incident, the big incident of the day. As Logano was in the high line, he had a big run on the 47, and who was out there with him? It was Stenhouse and who? I can't remember.
I don't know. Stenhouse and Logano are the two that are sticking in my mind.
Stenhouse and Logano were nose to tail, but it was John Hunter Nemechek that kept pushing Joey really hard and giving him big runs on the 47. But I don't remember who was leading that lane. Somebody was in front of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And
I thought Ricky was the leader of the
No, there was a car in front of him, I'm pretty sure. There was somebody else on that. I can't remember. Regardless, Joey's got these big runs coming, and he's in the third lane. And as that run develops, he tries to go to the middle, and Stenhouse is prepared to block that because he knows that, let that 22 by him, he's in big trouble. And he does halfway block him. He at least puts his left rear into Joey's right front. You see the fire come out the pipes of the 22 car. He rolls out of the throttle, and he's still got the momentum though, even as he lifted off the throttle to get by the 47, and he's working his way to the inside of him. And Stenhouse keeps trying to block. He tried 3 different times. Logano lifted 3 different times, and finally Joey was inside of him, and they ended up making contact. Got into the 8 car and just trashed a whole bunch of cars. Ryan Blaney being one of them. Just piled up a whole bunch of them and ruined a lot of good race cars at that particular point in the race. Some upset drivers after that, as you would imagine. I was upset at Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Obviously, I wanted Joey Logano to win the race, and to see how often he has a fast car and gets in a wreck is very disappointing. Some of them have certainly been his fault throughout the years. I didn't feel that this one was, and I'm curious to know what your take is.
Well, when I originally saw it, I thought it was more of a bad block on Ricky's. And yes, I think it was a bad block. It was definitely a late block. And but the more I see it, that Logano, I think, had a chance to just tuck in behind Ricky. I feel like Ricky was far enough down after the first attempt at the block that there wasn't enough room for him to just keep trying to shove inside of him. And at the time, I also thought the 4, who I kept thinking was Josh Berry, but it's Noah Gragson. When I was watching at the time, I thought, well, Gragson was up behind Logano. and I thought 'cause he was caught up into it too, and I thought maybe he was shoving him. But the more I look at it, it wasn't until Ricky the two actually started fully wrecking before Gregson got to the bumper, the 22. So to me, I put like 50-50 fault on both of them. They're both being aggressive and just the product of this package.
Yeah, Joey definitely had a big run that he was trying to take in that moment, and I just felt like after Ricky tried to throw the first block and it didn't work, he still had enough momentum inside of him that he's like, well, I'm just going to keep going. And he talked about getting pushed from behind, but you're right, Gregson wasn't up his bumper just yet, and I'm sure that the idea was if I roll out too much, I'm going to get hit and just start ping-ponging off both lanes here. But like I said, if he hadn't lifted 3 different times, I would have been like, what are you doing, man? I would have agreed with Kyle Busch that he was trying to be the first guy to the wreck. But when you watch his onboard and you hear him lift again, lift a third time, and the third time he lifts, he's already inside of him. And Stenhouse just won't get out of the way. At that point, it's like, what are you doing? Like, Ricky's got to give him room at that point, in my opinion, because he's already inside. But yeah, I understand that people want to put fault on both sides there, but I felt like it started with a really bad decision by Stenhouse. That, like I said, that took out a bunch of cars with 15 to go there. They ended up going back green, and with 5 laps to go, Cole Custer, who I really didn't expect to be as fast as he was, is shoving Christopher Bell on the second row and just pushing him really, really hard, and eventually gets misaligned with him and shoves him head first into the wall down the backstretch. Causes a big wreck and actually causes Ryan Preece to take off in an airplane-like fashion. I think that Jordan Brand should reconsider their sponsorship of Tyler Reddick and should probably put it on the 60 car, because he looked like Michael Jordan going up for a dunk at that point. The only thing that he was missing was his tongue hanging out like Lightning McQueen. And glad that he was okay, but that was a really bad wreck, and it was one of those deals where it felt like he just hung in the air forever. Once he got the nose of the car up in the air, he stayed in that position for such a long time. And finally, when the car started to slam down and roll, he was in bad shape at that point. And he had some very pointed comments afterwards as well. Once they end up going back racing again after they cleaned all that up, it was a green-white checkered finish. Cindric has still maintained his position at the front, done a really good job. Denny Hamlin shoved him way out there, and Hamlin was involved in at least one incident before and was in position to win the race. Shoves him way out there and then goes to make a move on him, and Custer's bringing the next group of cars up behind Hamlin, splits them 3 wide, and it looked like, from my vantage point, that Chase Briscoe was trying to help Denny. Obviously, he had a big run there, and instead of continuing to push the 41, he was going to go with the 11, and they just weren't lined up great for him to do that, and he was trying to get lined up on Denny's bumper, and in that process, as he's trying to come down, the 41's trying to come down and side draft at the same time, and they just all came together at once, and it turned the 11, wrecked the 41. The 19 did end up sneaking through there, but it just wadded up the whole front of the field. Cindric, he didn't wreck, but he got slowed up pretty bad. And you see Byron sneak through along with the 45, Tyler Reddick, and Jimmy Johnson ends up coming home in third there. Big questions as to why NASCAR didn't throw the yellow there after seeing what happened in the dual races Thursday night. But overall, it just was, I feel like it was a better race than we got the result of. I wouldn't have been upset if Corey LaJoie won because he was up there. I wouldn't have been upset if Cole Custer won. Cindric ran a great race. Even Denny, for all the adversity that he'd been through, I don't want to see Hamlin win, but to be a 4-time Daytona 500 winner, he was in position to do that. Briscoe qualified on the pole, had been spun out at one point. If he had made it up through there, I wouldn't have been upset. But the fact that they just parted the Red Sea like Moses, and here comes Byron and the 45 of Reddick up there with him, was just a very disappointing end to that race, in my opinion. How did you feel about it?
I mean, I always want to see it come to the checker flag. That's for sure. I didn't want to see him wreck. I don't feel like Byron was someone who was so slouched either, because he led a lot of laps there too. So he was up front just as much as I think anyone else was. But that I was rooting for a side-by-side finish coming to the line. Like I guess anybody else would want to see an excited finish. I mean, as far as coming back to the checkered flag without throwing a yellow, I mean, if there would have been a time to do it, it would have been this time. So that's a little bit inconsistent on NASCAR's part. But I feel like I think anything past that halfway point on a track coming back to green, I don't think it's gonna, or coming back to the, if they came back green from that point, doesn't make a difference. I think because I think they can still get personnel out there. I mean, once they cross the start finish line, they definitely get slowed up by then. So. But because in the truck race, they wrecked off of turn 3 and they threw out the yellow too. So I mean, that was that.
Yeah, I feel like you got to do something to where, I don't know. This is kind of off the cuff, but if the incident takes place after turn 2, even in turn 2, but at a track like Daytona where it's very large. If they wreck a bunch of cars from basically turn 2 on, I think it needs to stay green to the start finish line. Just because, unless somebody is barrel rolling and on fire, let them race. Because you want to make sure that you got the race stopped for the safety crew to get out there. And even that, when they come around to the checkered flag, they're going to slow down after that as though it were a caution. I don't know. I feel like as long as you're not prohibiting the safety crew from getting to guys that are in the wreck, and the wreck isn't blocking the leader's opportunity to get back to the start-finish line. Such as, if they were coming to the white and cars in the back of the pack were wrecking in the tri-oval to where the leaders are going to have to race through debris or wrecked cars to get back to the start-finish line, I think that the yellow should end the race at that point.
Yeah.
I think they should let them race as far as they can, somewhere down the backstretch. But if it takes place after turn 2, I say you should be able to, unless there's extenuating circumstances, go all the way back to the start-finish line. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
It seems like after the dual race, the one that Cindric won, they just were really jumping. Like, there would have been no reason to have the caution come out that fast, as close to the line as they were there. Just let them race.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that was an issue there, but it seemed to be something they wanted to hang on to. I don't know if they felt like they did jump the gun in that situation, so they were going to let it happen, let them roll in the 500. Which, look, nobody was going to pass Byron anyway.
No.
And whether they threw the yellow right there or let him come all the way back, that's fine. Do you remember an Xfinity race probably 10 years ago now at Daytona? Start of the race, first race of the year. I think it was Stewart and Stenhouse were both running in that one. And they all racked off at turn 4. And James Busher in the 31 car drove underneath all of them from like 14th place or something and won that race. This is kind of what that feels like to me, is just they wadded up a roadblock and somebody comes out of nowhere to win that race. It's not that if you told me on Sunday morning, hey, William Byron's going to win today, that I'd have been like, oh, that guy doesn't deserve it. But just seeing the way that it all played out, to me, it was like, that just is disappointing after you watched.
It's kind of an anticlimactic end to a great story, It's just this is how it's going to finish,
Yeah. I guess that part was a little bit disappointing. But outside of that, I really didn't have any issue with the race as a whole. I still don't like Ricky Stenhouse. But other than that, I thought it was a pretty good race, all things considered. Let's move on to the Xfinity Series race. I didn't watch more than probably the last 15 laps or so before I was able to tune in. Did you watch the whole thing?
I watched the whole thing.
What was take us through the race?
Well, obviously we had a wreck at lap 5. Brandon Jones got turned by Jesse Love due to a checkup, and for the most part, it was just a race dominated by Austin Hill until he ended up having rear end issues. He was racing out there with oil coming out of his car, and NASCAR finally said, you got to fix it or else you can't go back out. So otherwise, it was then won by Jesse Love and another RC car. So that's pretty much what it was to it. There's bad blocks and wrecks and stuff, but as far as overall, if you come to the racing product, I still believe it's the better product of all the series when it comes to.
What I saw of the Xfinity race, I was really impressed with. I thought that as far as the package of the car goes, looked like a lot of fun to race. And I would say that like I said, the Cup cars surprised me in a pleasant way, but at the same point, I thought that, like you just said, the Xfinity cars were the better race as far as from the driver's seat. It looked like it would have been the one that I would have wanted to been behind the wheel of myself.
Yeah, as far as much as I don't really care much for Austin Hill or RCR or anything, but having a team come out and you know he's going to be a threat under these restrictor plate tracks, and having the ability to run up front and control your own destiny. It just seemed like that's the kind of thing you're able to do with these cars, and whereas I feel like the Cup cars, you're at the mercy of the pushers and the runs and what lane you're in and stuff, especially when you get through wide, you're just blockaded. Not that that doesn't happen in Xfinity Series, but I feel like lanes come and go quicker, and once you get things lined up right and stuff, you can go. And it just to me, it just feels like if you have the car and the ability, you can control your own destiny more in the Xfinity Series.
More like an early 2000s Cup race.
Yeah.
As far as you'd see Dale Earnhardt Jr. lead a lot of those races because he had a fast car and he knew how to block the runs. Yeah. And you can, like you just said, kind of control things on your own at that point.
Dale Jr., Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon.
Yep.
I mean, those were to me the three best restrictor plate drivers out there. They knew what they were doing out there.
Yeah. Every one of those guys was going to be a threat every time you went to those racetracks. And honestly, those are the big three that I can think of. I don't really know of somebody else that I'd go, oh yeah, that he was a good restrictor plate racer back then. Kurt Busch kind of had some moments here and there too in the 97 and in the 2 car, but you're right. I think it was Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, and Dale Jr. are really the ones. Michael Waltrip, I guess you'd have to throw him in there too. But yeah, that was a product that I very much enjoyed, was what they put on in the Xfinity Series race. The truck race, it was pretty straightforward. It was what you would expect. It wasn't as much of a wreck fest as I thought it was going to be. I thought it was pretty enjoyable for a truck race. They did have some big wrecks here and there, and some bad moves were made here and there, but you saw Ben Rhodes win the first stage, Matt Crafton win the second stage, and Kligerman ends up winning it on the racetrack. And I didn't even know till this morning. When I was listening to the teardown, they were talking about, Kligerman wins a truck race and then he got DQ'd, and I'm like, wait a minute, I hadn't heard about that yet. And it was, I went and looked at the results and it said Corey Heim won the race. And then I texted you and I'm like, what happened? And it turns out he got, what'd you say? The truck wasn't high enough.
Yeah, the rear end was too low on both sides. So supposedly there's an argument to be made about race damage or something like that. They're trying to appeal it, so that'll be heard tomorrow, or whenever you hear this. It'll be Tuesday. So, so that was, I didn't know till the next morning. I woke up and saw it on Twitter. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
That's disappointing for Parker. He's got to feel like NASCAR's got it out for him. Every single time he's in position to win, something bad happens.
Yeah,
but
the Roval previous year or whatever.
Yeah. Disappointing for him for sure. But hopefully they win their appeal. I doubt it. But
I was rooting for him when they come off of there. I was like, I'll keep Heim behind you.
I'm a Ford fan, obviously. Yeah. But when I was looking at that Truck Series lineup, I'm like, as they were coming down to the end of the race, I'm like, give me Parker Kligerman. I hope he wins this thing. Yeah. And I thought he did, and then he didn't.
I find it funny though that he was in the booth the next day, and of course they're talking about Truck Series highlights. I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, that would be
awkward.
Yeah, it would have to be. Anything else from the racing action this weekend that you wanted to talk about?
I can't think of nothing.
The only other thing that I guess I would touch on would be the dual races. We talked about it a little bit, but that second duel, and how disappointing for Eric Jones, which all the legacy cars were really fast all weekend. How disappointing for him to be that close to getting a dual win. And I know it's just a dual race, but it's a big boost for a team like Legacy and the struggles that they've had to be able to have the opportunity to win a race like that and just come up short is really disappointing. Just because NASCAR's a little trigger happy with the caution was, again, I would rather see Cindric win it as a fan, but it just felt like Jones got a little bit robbed at that point. I wanted to ask you this question about superspeedway racing. I think that we have the same opinion, and that is when you come into this race, you know that it's going to be a fuel mileage race, that you're going to have to save fuel. And that is something that is relatively in the driver's hands as far as how much throttle you apply. And yeah, you're kind of just riding there, but it's it is controlled by the driver as far as how much fuel you save. Am everything I say accurate to this point?
Yeah.
And you don't like that type of racing.
Yeah.
But here's my question to that, and I agree with you. I'm not a fan of that either. My question is, why do we dislike that? The fact that the driver is trying to save a resource, a consumable resource like the amount of fuel, for the purpose of a shorter pit stop to gain track position so that they can put the throttle all the way down later in the race, versus something that we really enjoy, which is a race that causes tire wear. You have the same situation to where you're not using as much throttle because you're trying to save your tires so that later in the race you can put that throttle down harder and use that rubber. Why are those two different things? Why is it that we value the tire wear situation but don't care about the fuel mileage thing?
Well, for one, the tire wear leads to passing on track and racing side by side, and the fuel savings is all a pit road passing game. That's all it is. And the reason why they started doing this is because, well, one, to change 4 tires is quicker than filling up a car anymore. So pretty much your pit times are based on fuel speed, whether you do want to take tires or not. So I guess that kind of makes that argument irrelevant, but it just feels like, when you're saving tires, I feel like you're still trying to go fast. You're not mashing the throttle, but you're trying to not overdrive the car, but you're still trying to go fast as you can without spinning or overdoing your tires. But you're not, to me, it's not at Daytona, they were going like 3 seconds a lap slower. You're not doing that saving tires even. I mean, because at the end of tire runs, you're still going slower than you are, even if you save tires. It's not like you're going to gain speed at the end. You'll just be quicker than those who didn't save as well.
Right.
So to me, it just, it's just, it feels like the racing is more artificial. They go 3 wide at Daytona, but they're 10 miles an hour slower than what they could be. They're just like driving down the highway. It's just, to me, I know strategy is a part of racing, but I don't mind fuel mileage races that like coming to an end of a race, or a pit window comes in or whatever, or green flag stops or whatever, and a guy wants to stay out and just drive his car as slow as he can to try and make it to an end of a race. But doing it just to get to a pit stop and make your pit stop quicker just doesn't sit with me very well.
Yeah, I can't say that I really have a good reason why I feel that way. To me, they seem like on paper very similar, but they just have 2 very different feels.
Yeah.
And I can't, make that tangible as far as why that feeling is the way that it is. It's still a skill. Like, you still have to be skillfully saving fuel to a degree. My argument to that would be, when Logano got in the back of the pack after the throttle body issue, everybody else was saving fuel, and he drove to the front because he wasn't trying to save as much fuel. I'm sure they'd packed the thing full when he was on pit road and everything else. And when they came down to the end of the 3rd stage, he was in the back again for changing that airbox, and he couldn't go to the front because he was trying to race. I mean, he did eventually get there, but he was trying to race, but you could see the outside lane wasn't forming up. They weren't locked 3 wide because that bottom lane was the dominant lane at that point. And the 2nd and 3rd lanes were having a lot of trouble forming, and Joey was having a hard time getting his way through there to get to those positions. Now, he eventually did get up there and close to the front, but I think that situation there is where everything was out the window as far as the savings went, and now we're going to race. And I don't know. It's hard to draw a whole lot of difference between those 2 scenarios. I can't remember who said it, if it was Reddick or Herbst or somebody like that said that we might as well just make the Daytona 500 65 laps because that's all the more we race anyways.
That was Herbst, I believe.
Was it? And I don't like that either, obviously, shortening it up that much because that's all the more they race. Do you think that if they played around with the stages to where fuel mileage, like you knew that you were going to make it to the stage end for fuel, that would improve racing?
Maybe for the first couple stages, getting to the end of the stages, but also at the same point, the more fuel you'll save in that stage, stage break when you do come to pit and take fuel or whatever, you're still basing off how much fuel you got to put into the car. So I don't know if you'll ever get rid of it, especially with the way this car is. And
yeah. I don't want to have a rose-colored glasses look either. But, I mean, I remember races of the past in the early 2000s where they would just be single file training around the top to save fuel. So it's not like this isn't a part of super speedway racing and hasn't been for a long time. I would rather, I guess, if they're gonna race or if they're going to save fuel, I'd rather see them 3 wide than I would single file.
yeah, my idea is like when they got single file in the past, whatever, it was more of a biding their time thing than it was a fuel saving thing. They don't. One thing that'd be interesting is to have more tire wear at these types of tracks too. Make them have to change tires, this and that, and handling issues. Because I just barely got. I listened to like 10 minutes of Denny's podcast before I came here. And he talked about it. It used to be these cars used to be more of a handful. We couldn't get this close to each other or whatever. And, to have to push and stuff like this, and you have to manhandle the cars and whatnot. And, it's just another product of this car being, I hate saying too easy to drive because I know I couldn't hop in one and drive it, but when it comes to racing and whatnot, that's, it just, I don't know where I'm going with it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I share your frustration, but I understand. I feel like my frustration is illogical also. I feel like I'm at this point just being a whiny NASCAR fan, saying that, I don't like this, which I don't like it. I've seen something I do like in the past. And I think that it's just, like you're saying, you're not going to be able to avoid this right now. And I think that this is still probably the best form of racing we're going to see with this car on these racetracks right now. So I'm not going to complain about it too bad, especially after the first race of the year. It did have a disappointing finish to it with not even with Byron winning, which that did disappoint me, but just the way that he won the race. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Atlanta next week. I should talk about a little bit our picks. I picked Todd Gilliland because I figured Fords are going to be fast, and I was looking forward to somebody like him being somewhat obscure, but being able to run up front and possibly have a shot at the win. He did run up front quite a bit of the race, caught up in a wreck. Bubba Wallace, another guy that was faster than I thought that he would be, and he ran up front. That was your pick. And he ends up getting caught up in a wreck too. Fortunately, I finished 2 positions better with my pick of Todd Gilliland, as he finished 27th and Bubba Wallace finished 29th. So we're off to a hot start this year in the picks. And we're going to be up against it again next week with Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, if you talk about our point system, we're taking the driver's points. Right. So you actually got more stage points than I did too. So you're up by 6 points instead of the 2 positions. So
nice.
That's a interesting dynamic we'll have going throughout the year of how many points our drivers attain.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a cool way to score that rather than just a point for who finishes ahead of the other. I still like my point system better to where you get points for your average running position, but we'll bring that to NASCAR in the off season.
I did think more about that. I wonder if you could get like a bonus point for running laps in the top 5. So if you ran 50 laps in the let's say 50 laps in the top 5 throughout the race, you get a point. You lead the most laps, you get more points than that or something like that. That was, instead of like doing an average or figuring out just laps run in this certain range, that would be a lot easier to track, I think, than like coming out with an average in a
if it didn't come out with basically, if you could pay points every lap, that would be most ideal. As far as you're running in second position this lap, you run in second position this lap, and you just keep amassing second position's points. Now that's going to be a massive amount of points throughout the year, but I don't know. I think that would be
it'd be interesting.
Yeah, it would be interesting if nothing else. But NASCAR is kind of slow to make positive changes, so I don't know how that all work out. But I'll call Jim and see what he wants to do here. Anything else you want to talk about from the Daytona weekend?
That's all I got.
That's all I got too. I'm looking forward to Atlanta. A little bit more of the kind of super speedway racing that I think we were looking for. Actually, even though it's a smaller racetrack, I think the package will make it more of what we've been used to seeing throughout the early 2000s there. And, looking forward to see what that'll look like, and we'll be sure to make our picks and probably not have them win and see where they ended up finishing. But until then, we'll talk to you guys after Atlanta.